Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the June 15th, 2020 Caribou City Council meeting. Roll call: Joan Terrio, Tom Ayer, Doug Rowell, Hugh Kilpatrick, and Mark Gaughan are present. Jody Smith and Nicole Cody are absent and excused. Council prayer, item number 2. We pray for our country at all times, that all citizens are safe, healthy, and happy. We pray for the wisdom for all those who guide and govern. Help this government body in every situation to know and to do the things that are right and just with soundness of judgment in making vital decisions. We pray for the peacemakers, that the holy, life-giving Spirit may ever dwell in their hearts, and that the barriers of fear, suspicion, and hatred may fall. This we pray to the Holy Father. Amen. Item number 3, please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you very much. Item number 4, public forum. Do we have any letters or anything that need to be read? Yes.
So Gary Aiken wrote, emailed in. He's at 471 Main Street in Caribou. He says, Council has spent a lot of time over the past couple months discussing how they can lower the mill rate by 1 mil for the Caribou taxpayers. If my memory serves me correctly, 1 mil is approximately $370,000. Since the first of this year, Council has passed a motion to place $896,029 of unencumbered taxpayers' money into an emergency account, which I don't believe was legal from the standpoint of how it was done or where all the amounts that were used came from, based on our existing charter. The City of Caribou has a $3 million CD of unencumbered taxpayer money, which is due for reinvestment. The city will be receiving another $324,000 from the landfill operation, which could be added to the revenue line in this year's budget. The city is receiving $477,000 from surrounding communities for fire and ambulance service. How much of the taxpayers' money is the council going to keep squirreling away before they finally agree to give the taxpayers a break, which you keep saying you want to do? And that's from Gary Aiken.
Any others?
No.
Dennis?
I don't have any letters that came in, but Ms. Jordan Rosignol has asked if she could come before the council tonight and have a couple of minutes during the public forum.
Yes, she can. Good evening.
Hi, thank you for allowing me to come in.
Please state your name, please.
Oh, sorry. My name is Jordan Rosignol, and I own Miss Jordan's Child Development Center on 60 Sweden Street. We've had some issues. We've been there for since December of 2018, and for the past 2 springs and summers, we're having a real issue with speed. I know it's not just my business that is concerned about it. I have concern because of the nature of our business, that we're children. One of our families owns the Cubby. They've had concerns about the speed in front of their building. So basically, I'm here just for some help, I guess, in figuring out what we can do about the speed issue, whether it be speed bumps. I'm really open to any ideas. I just want it taken care of because it's becoming really dangerous for our children. I have letters from parents I can leave with you if you want, who have witnessed the speed.
Well, Anybody have anything to just quickly? Hugh?
I would just like to say, between the manager and the police department, we've got many full-time employees that should be able to take your problem and solve it
Okay.
in a relative quick fashion.
They put a speed monitor thing there today. This morning they put it, and that helps when it's there. I don't expect it to stay there full time. And last summer there was a squad car parked kind of on that little empty lot, and they didn't record speed because they were visible. But especially at pickup time, which is anywhere between 4:30 and 6 o'clock, I feel like that it's definitely the busiest time of our day. But it also seems to be the part where people are speeding the most, and it's just there's many small children, and we had a little guy, a piece of paper flew in the road and he chased it, and a parent has multiple children, and we do fire drills in the front, and that's where we have to line up, and I feel so nervous every time. So I don't expect a squad car there all the time. I don't expect full-time surveillance, but something, anything that would alleviate my worries.
Joan?
I still think a sign, a sign somewhere there. It's a one-way street, so you only have to have it going one way. But a good-sized sign that will catch your eye when
Yeah.
you see that. Because I think a lot of people, what it is they just go through without any thought, and stuff like that. And if there's a sign there, that will bring your attention to the fact that there's children.
Yeah, shoot. Yeah,
Yeah,
I should probably
and slow down. And if you get it ahead of time, when they first turn onto there from Herschel Street or whatever, and get it so that they will see that right away, I would think that should help.
I would hope
because,
so, yep. I
just-
have a little man with the
Yeah.
flag that I took from my house, and there's that empty building next to County Quick Crane, so I've been putting it in a parking spot every
Yeah.
morning, just to remind people
You
at
see
least.
signs like children at play and things on other roads, or deaf child, and when people
Yeah.
are going along. So I don't know why there couldn't be a nice sign right up there that will grab their attention, and they will know.
Slow down.
Because I think there are people who are going to speed all the time, but I think there are some people who just don't realize, and they're in a hurry to get through. And
Exactly. I see a lot of people trying to beat Herschel Street to the stop
Right.
sign.
Mhm.
I did it as a teenager. That you use that to
Yeah.
speed through, and you don't
Yeah.
think.
Yeah, you
So-
don't, that's right.
Yeah, and where you can only back out of spots, people are backing out with children, and I actually saw lovely Jenna in front of County Footprint the other day almost get rammed.
Yeah.
And the person beeped at her. She was just backing up, and this person was speeding, beeped at her, and then rode around her in the parking spots rather than just wait. So it's busy, and it's stressful. So that's why I kind of was hoping either a sign or speed bumps that would physically stop them from speeding. That their car would get messed up if they.
That'd be fun in the winter.
Yeah, that's what and that's what I thought, that they're not able to have it there for the plows and stuff. But there's 98 kids enrolled, so it's really, really busy in the morning, and it's really busy at night. So I just have concerned parents, and I run out there and chase after and yell at people, but
You're brave, somebody to pull down.
yeah, I hope not. So I don't know, anything I'd be open to if I don't know what process there is to putting a sign. I know we're not technically like a school zone, and I know lowering the speed limit won't make people stop, but 25 does seem fast when you're going through that. It's almost like a parking lot speed where you kind of should crawl through. But if a sign helps, then I'm open to that too.
The issue with the school zone and everything, because I know you brought that up in your Facebook post, we can't do that because of spot zoning.
Yeah.
And so, although it wouldn't be a bad idea, and the speed bumps are, and from what you've told, and I don't know how much communication you've had with Jordan, the speed bumps are because plows would destroy them. I think there's a way, and my sentiments are with you, there's a way that you guys can quickly and efficiently, and I emphasis on quickly, fix this. I mean, I'm the same way as Jordan and I sped through there maybe a couple times because there's tall buildings and I had a loud exhaust, and it was just, it's the way it was when you were young. But the fact of the matter is now we do have a business here, and we have a business with children, and Dennis said he'd talk to you about moving your entrance around back. Is that feasible, possible, any?
It's not handicap accessible.
It's not handicap accessible.
And our security system is in the front.
Okay.
So, like, all our parents' key fobs work in the front.
Okay, so that's out of the question now. So we've got and I think signs, maybe, you know, these are only my suggestions. You guys, this is what your job is. You know, you figure this out. But maybe dropping it to 15 miles an hour, because she's right. It's a parking lot down there. If you have business downtown, go do your business. Calmly go out. That's the trouble with that thing over there, is that it was meant for businesses. So they could be on some sort of main street. But now people are using it as a racetrack in the Indy 500. So I think if we found signs or we did anything like that, and as long, it's like I was explaining to somebody today, if it doesn't cost over $1,000 or $100,000 to the taxpayer to fix a tiny little problem, I don't think anybody's really gonna be really mad about it. I mean, we're talking about saving lives.
You'd be surprised.
And
I got a typed out anonymous letter saying that I shouldn't be complaining about it. So people were
Here's
really
the thing
upset
about
it.
anonymity. It doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Unless somebody just comes up and says, hey, this is who I am, this is who I have a problem with, don't pay attention to it. I mean, I'm sure you see the anonymity of some of these Facebook posts that we receive as a council.
Yeah.
So look,
Exactly.
if you have a problem, we're here.
Yeah, that's why I'm like gonna always be vocal about things, because
Absolutely.
it's not just my business; these are my babies.
Yeah.
My own two are there.
One more thing. Has your landlord talked to you about the sign and everything? And
A little bit.
a little bit? Nothing at all? I mean, that's kind of the improvement of the facade of our town, and
He said he got a quote from somewhere in Bangor, but I haven't
that's right, out of city, not local though. Okay.
heard a thing. So,
All right. Well, good luck, Jordan.
Thank you.
I hope something happens soon.
so would you like me to just follow up with Dennis?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
And Chief Cahagan and I were even having a conversation just this afternoon
Yeah.
about different things that you can do with visual awareness to people that are driving through an area
Yeah.
and things. So we'll strategize.
Busy. That
Hmm.
corner, there's always people entering the post office. And
Yeah. I imagine you had something in your manager's report about this tonight, talking about it or anything.
I don't know that I do, but
No.
we'll
Okay. So you guys had talked, and you're going to figure it out, though, huh?
we'll
I went to the open house that you had when you first opened up.
Yes, thank you for
Very
coming.
impressed with the investment you've made, the risk you're taking,
huge risk.
and not only that, but somewheres and deep inside, I always think there's a connection between facilities such as what you're doing, some other daycare facilities, a new school,
Yeah.
a new park,
Mhm.
a park and recs department. Somehow there's a marketing strategy here that it all comes together.
When parents come to look for, they want to live here, they look for daycare first. How are the schools and is there daycare? So
And-
we needed to make it nice.
And you hope it all, in a good marketing scheme, it would come together in the form of creation of more jobs, more people wanting to move into Caribou, more tax dollars.
Yes.
And so there is a connection here. Is there any particular time of day that you notice more problems than others?
Yeah, during pickup and drop off, unfortunately.
What
So
are
it's-
those hours?
Pickup is, or drop off is anytime 6:30 to 7:30, but it's like the 7 to 7:30 people are going to work, that work commute, and then pickup time 4:30 to 6 going home.
Okay.
Those times are really the busiest.
Okay.
So,
I mean, I'm of the mindset that it seems like some police presence at certain key times, unannounced presence.
yeah.
And if people are speeding, a definite summons, and along with some signs that people have had, along with the creativity that Dennis and the police chief can come up with. Keep us abreast.
Okay.
Let us know how things are going. And we can't be speeding downtown Caribou, Maine.
No,
I don't
we
get,
can't.
I mean, I get it. It's your business, but still, there's other businesses there too.
Yeah, it's the
So
law.
if they're speeding, that's an enforceable issue.
Yeah. I've chased
It's not
people.
rocket science. It's not rocket science.
Yeah, that's the thing. I just want people to follow the law. That's
Yep.
it.
Yep.
So,
Thank you very much
I
for coming in.
appreciate it. Thank you.
Thanks, Jordan.
Any other public? No?
We just, no, we have, we did receive an email, but it is for the public hearing later on in the agenda. So we'll read it at that
Okay,
time.
got it. Just want to let the public know that the public forum, we're going to start allowing people to come to the city council meetings to have their chance to say a few words. There's a protocol for coming through the front door, and then you wait, and one at a time people will be able to come in. Dennis and the staff have it all figured out, and we're just going to go trial and error and hope that we can come up with something that can match up. Thank you very much. Item number 5, financials for May 2020. Dennis.
So the May report that we have indicates that our balance, our asset balance for the city is at $6.44 million. And the liabilities for the city are currently sitting at $5.88 million. The bottom fund balance at the end of May was sitting at $2.34 million. As far as the fund balance under Fund 600, the general fund balance as far as the assets minus the liabilities was sitting at $560,000 roughly. The expenses for the city at the end of May, total expenses were sitting at 36.3% for the year. And so that is trending again in line with the percentage of the year that's gone by. We have a couple of departments that are currently ahead of that, but we expect will come back into line by the end of the year due to one-time purchases that have taken place earlier this year. The biggest two being the airport department, which is already at 50% spent. That is primarily due to a fuel purchase that took place earlier this year. Right now, we don't anticipate having to do another large purchase like that, and may even be able to limp into next year before we make another fuel purchase. We'll monitor that as the season continues. Our busiest airport season is actually in August, so the busy time is still ahead. Under unclassified expenses, you can see we're at 62.5% spent. Much of that is we have some expenses with people retiring or leaving employment and being cashed out for their leave. That is in accordance with our policy. We've had more people do that this year than we anticipated, and so we're monitoring that. We do have a separate reserve fund for unpaid leave, which we'll be tapping into most likely as those continue. We received, even last week, another announcement of a retirement in July that we weren't anticipating. So we'll continue to watch that. As far as the, I guess also to note that the Snowmobile Trail Maintenance Fund is currently showing 102% spent. Much of that, again, is because of the grant funds that we receive from the state. Those come in later in the year. And so we anticipate that that fund will be made whole later this year. The housing fund and the FSS funds are also based on grants that are given to us from the federal government, and they are consistent with their years. The revenue received to date, we are at 18.8%, and so that, as is consistent with our annual trends, we see a reduction or a difference between expenses and revenue up until we make commitment. And we really hope that we can set the mill rate and do commitment the first part of July. Ideally would be at your next city council meeting on the 29th, but we can have discussions about that later tonight as we discuss the mill rate. But overall, the city is in still a positive position. Our cash flow chart that we've included in the packet for you illustrates, again, the trend that we have through the end of July and into August, where our low season is for our cash. The black line on the chart is showing our current year, and it shows it through June 11th. And so you can see we're currently with the cash flow trending a little above the 3-year average with where we're at now. The indication from the state is that the next couple months of state revenue sharing will be really a tell of how the effects of the pandemic declarations have affected the overall economy. And so we'll once we have those numbers, we can show those to you, and hopefully everybody's really spent their stimulus checks in a way that helps us out. But again, we're sitting a little more positive than the previous 3 years average for our cash flow at this point. Any questions?
You
had mentioned the expense side, we're on track. This is through 5 months out of the year?
Right.
Okay. On track meaning dollar value, not percentage, right?
Right.
Okay.
We are at 5 months through the year would be 42% of the year,
Right.
and our total expenses are under 40%.
So we're about 540,000 under budget right now, but we are I guess my question is, are we typically at 36.3% at the end of 5 months most years?
That's a good question. I'll have to go back and review May financials for the previous years.
The only reason I ask is we're 540,000 to the good right now, under.
Yeah, and the department heads, we've known that due to the slowness of the economy and the executive orders that have been imposed, that there may not be as much revenue coming in, and so we have cautioned the department heads to limit spending where they could, and that's probably the most indicative reason for that at this point.
Okay.
Any other questions, comments? Dennis, can I ask a question? How about our winter fuel? Do we buy that ahead of time? Fuel for the heat, stuff like that.
Currently, it's purchase it as we need it. There's not, and that's really what it is. As the fuel gets low, we'll purchase what we need.
Can you pre-buy fuel? In other words, if you wanted to get, and I don't know the correct terminology here, but if you wanted to buy all of next winter's fuel oil, could you do that next week? Forget the money part. I mean,
Right.
is there a system out there that you can prepay? And
I know that personally, I've been able to do that at my home with the fuel company that I use, and they basically lock in my rate today, and I have to commit to purchasing so many gallons of fuel over the next period of time that we've set. And in theory, I purchase at a really good time, and so I'll be able to weather those up and downs better. I'll have to ask and see from our different suppliers if they have a similar program for the city, and definitely check into the market rates right now and where we're at.
I purchased some from the home. I filled my tanks up only because I couldn't believe the price. And I says, let's get her right now and tighten our belts. And I believe when the pandemic thing is over, everything's going to go back to normal. These are going to be some of your cheaper prices for fuel oil,
Sure.
heating oil. I can't speak about diesel or kerosene or propane, but would you look into that
Sure.
for us and just see if we could bank ahead or do something?
I believe we did a similar thing up the airport, didn't we, Dennis? We filled that up there at the cheaper rates.
Yeah, we were watching the markets. We get an update every 3-4 days on our supplier of what the prices are, and when it hit what was then an all-time low, we made purchases.
But this is more than just filling your tank. I mean, yeah, go fill the tanks, but can we have another 4 or 5 tanks already
Exactly.
purchased?
Yeah.
Right.
That was my point.
Yep.
And the cash flow chart looks good. That's a pretty nice little chart to look at. Okay. Any other questions or comments on the financials? Hearing none, Chair will entertain a motion.
So moved.
Second.
Moved by Tommy, seconded by Hugh. Any other questions, comments, additions, subtractions? Hearing none, all those in favor? Unanimous. Thank you. Item number 6, bid awards. Approval of tax acquired property bids. Dennis, quite a lengthy list.
It is, Mayor. We took the direction that the council gave us to modify the requesting minimum bid amount on these properties. The past practice of the city has been to look at the assessed value of the properties and request roughly 30% of the assessed value, which generally would cover our taxes owed, interest, fees, and possibly give us a little bit of cushion. The last direction we received from the council was, let's just put out the properties for the amounts that we owe in taxes, fees, and interest as the minimum bid, unless there were other expenses we needed to have attached to the properties, and see what kind of response we get. And so we did that this year, and as you've indicated, we have many bids that came in on multiple properties, and rather than go through the entire list, just know that at the end of the day, we've received above our minimum bids more than we anticipated. And so we would recommend that the council approve the highest bids for each of the properties indicated in the packet. With one exception, I guess, is just a matter of information that the tax acquired property at 47 Sincock Street, the lone bidder for that property was the previous owner to when we tax acquired it, and the amount that was bid was for the full repayment or the full payment of the taxes and fees owed. And so that would be really in a sense an accepting of their payment to return the property back to them. But everybody else, we'd recommend that we accept the loan bid or the high bid for each of the properties in the packet. I should also note for the council that I spoke with a gentleman this afternoon who expressed some concern or consternation with the bid process, and that there was a piece of property that he lives close to and he'd kept his eye on for quite some time. He'd approached the finance department about buying that property before it went out to bid. At that time, the minimum bid amount prior to the council's direction was set at roughly $7,100. After the council direction, it went out for roughly $5,600. Through the bidding process, we are required by our own policies to put these properties out to bid, so we couldn't just take that individual's payment. They put a bid on this particular property, but were outbid by somebody else. And so, again, they were just a little upset that they had hoped to be able to get this property and that they were outbid through the process. And had hoped that maybe the council might find it, because of his interest in the property being in close proximity and his interest, that they might not grant the highest bid in that instance. But I explained we are required to put them out to bid, and really it's as the highest bids come in and everybody had a chance to bid on it, it's my recommendation that we just go with the highest bid on all the properties.
Is it on this list right here?
Yes. Property number 33. Minimum bid amount requested was $3,300. The high bid was $5,651.
Motion to accept all the highest bids for the properties on this list, with the exception of 47 Sincock.
Second?
Moved by Hugh, seconded by Joan, to accept the highest bid as presented to the council. Once again, a very impressive list and some very impressive bids. Any questions, comments?
How many more properties do we have out there that
47.
we still own?
I'll confirm that for you. I don't have it in front of me tonight. And also, there are other properties that the city owns around the city, which were not tax acquired, that we may want to look at putting those out for public auction as well at some point.
Okay.
I think that's our goal, is to try to clean up as much as we can and get them back out into the private sector's hands. So this is a great start. Any other questions or comments?
Mayor, if I might,
Go ahead.
the motion was to accept 47 Sincock Street. Is there going to be another motion as far as approving that sale? Or,
I say we do it separately.
Okay.
okay.
Any other questions or comments on the motion? Hearing none, all those in favor? Unanimous. Chair will entertain a motion to accept. Is this how you want me to do it? 47 Sincock Street bid?
So moved.
Moved by Doug, seconded by Joan, to accept the bid for 47 Sincock Street. Actually, it was a check. All those any questions or comments? Hearing none, all those in favor? Unanimous. Thank you very much. Thank you, Dennis, for the work on the bid process.
And that, again, I would throw that kudo back to the finance department that managed all of that and opened all the bids and dealt with the public and questions on that. So they did a
Pass
good job.
along our thanks to them also. New business, item number 7. 7A, countersigning RSU 39 budget validation referendum warrant and notice of election. Dennis, could you explain this a little bit to us, please?
Danielle, you want to take this one? Okay. The RSU, in order to have an election on the RSU budget, has to put out a warrant and notice of election similar to we as a city for our own elections. As the city is the administrators of the election, the city council has to countersign basically, we're going to have this election. And so that's really what it is tonight, is indicating to the public that we as a city are going to be holding this election as requested by the RSU.
Doug?
I have a couple concerns. One is, as I mentioned earlier, was the fact that in this verbiage here, it doesn't explain what their budget is. It does not clearly state to the people what their budget amount is and what the increase that they're asking for. I, as one, would like to see that in that writing. I think the people and the citizens have a right to know those numbers prior to, and then all corresponding documents after that. It should be present. My second concern is, and I would ask that you reach out to Mr. Doak, and I would like an explanation as to why they're coming to the people to beg for money when we're saving $1.2 million. Granted, we have not gone 2 full years or a full year with the new school. I understand that. But they have removed some buildings and the heat cost. Surely that would cover what increase they're looking for. I would like to have an explanation on that, if you would, please.
I'd like to ask just a clarification. Is this the language that that the voters are going to be asked to vote on when it says about 2/3 of the way down on page 23, Article 1? It reads, "Do you favor approving the regional school unit number 39 budget for the upcoming school year that was adopted at the last regional school unit budget meeting?" Is that the language that actually goes on the question?
Where this is part of the warrant for the election, I would say yes. And I think, if I might, one of the reasons why they don't have a dollar amount in there yet is because they are still going to be having a budget meeting on June 23rd, I believe, in which the budget will be discussed with the public in more detail. And so they could potentially modify what's been discussed in the budget, and so they don't have their final number yet to put into the warrant. But I understand your concern, and
Well, the potential, it could be, had been put in there as potentially, as well as not putting anything, right? There's two sides to every coin here. I think it should be in that Article 1 stating that, do you favor approving the RSU budget that currently is XYZ $1 million with an additional raise of XYZ money? I think it should be in that, or potentially. But as well as one could say, we don't want to put a number in there because, we're not sure. You can flip that coin and say you put something in there as a placeholder so people know what's coming. And I think that that'll generate more interest in getting to those warrants to vote on it, or the night they have their, I call it, vote on the warrants, to send it out. I think it should be in that Article 1. It should clearly state what their current budget is and what they're begging the people for more money for. And if you would also, I'm just reiterating to you, please reach out. I would like an explanation as to, with all these millions of dollars of savings, why are we going to the taxpayers for money? If you would reach out with and get a written explanation, and maybe it'll educate me. I have a hard time swallowing that. It doesn't pass the smell test. Thanks.
Tom?
At what point do we have to have this warrant signed in order for the election to take place? Is there a time frame?
our primary election judge is not here this evening. Do you know, Danielle?
Well, we have our ballots right now for the state, and the school can't put theirs out until this is done.
Mm-hmm. But what I'm asking is, at what time do we have to have it done?
I believe Jane was hoping it would be signed tonight. That was the.
Well, I know Jane was hoping, but
So is the school.
I'm sure the school's hoping. But I find it a little tough that if they still haven't had their final budget meeting with the citizens, because the citizens could come in and say, hey, we want you to cut it even further. Or they might come in and say, hey, we want more money to be put in. In my mind, I think we should wait. You're giving Jane a call? In my mind, I think we should wait until the school has had their public hearing, and that be that.
It'd be nice to see the final numbers and verbiage in that article.
Well, it needs to be in there, yeah.
It needs their budget plus what they're asking.
Anytime you're dealing with bond issues from the state, something like that, the numbers are always in there.
Absolutely.
And I don't feel comfortable signing this unless the numbers are in there.
Agreed.
We'll wait for Dennis's.
We're on the hotline to Jane. We're gonna.
Don't let them rattle you. I'm here to help you. I'm from the government. I'm here to help.
I'm pretty sure the numbers are there on the ballot when we go in and vote.
When they're putting this publication out and it's going in the newspaper, and hopefully it's more than just that little corner ad there that's 1 by 2 inches. Blow that up so people can read it and have the numbers that they're talking with. What is their current budget? I don't believe anybody knows it to begin with. And I think it would probably shock people to find out what that budget is. As a council, we have to lay our cards out. We get the hide taken right off us. There's no difference.
And if you want the city of Caribou, which is governed by this council, to run an election, this is the way we like it. If not, I guess you got to run your own.
Amen.
Now I'm sure somebody will come back and say, "Well, you can't do that," because they always do. Show me anything that has to do with legality. Show me, and then I'll stand corrected. But show me where it states, the main state law, that we have to hold an election for the RSU. I know it's there, but as far as verbiage goes, show me where we can't have the verbiage, or show me where we can't have a rainy day fund. Don't tell me, show me. Guy on the loading dock used to say that to us all the time. Oh, we got that broccoli right in there. Don't tell me, show me.
Has he made contact?
I think he has, but he's having a long, drawn-out conversation.
Rec Center opened up Monday, did it? Pardon?
It's a good thing. Yeah.
It opened up this past. Have you heard any comments or anything?
What was it, Mark?
The Rec Center. Heard any comments? I've been on the farm. I haven't left.
Man.
I haven't left the Honda. Yes.
You want me to text him back?
I'm gonna take driving lessons all over again here pretty soon.
I know. I think opening stuff back up is a good thing. Practice your social distancing. You want to wear a mask, wear a mask. But let's get back to some sort of normalcy.
Well, we've got a couple more weeks and she'll go to phase 3. And then
Oh, is that? I thought it was like a couple more years. It's a couple more weeks.
yeah, July 1st.
I thought it was years. The way she does things down there.
Okay, Dennis, what is the verdict?
So after talking with Jane, the warrant itself would not necessarily have to be signed tonight. it could be looked at on the 29th after the RSU has their budget meeting. The possible implication, if that delay happens, is she's getting ready to send out absentee ballots, which go out in the mail and then also have to be returned back before 8 p.m. on the day of the election. And so there's some concern that she has if council does not take action to the 29th, we send things out on the mail on the 30th, is there the possibility that things could not get turned around in time? She was hoping to be able to send out the absentee ballots the night after the RSU has their budget meeting, so on the 24th, giving everybody a little more time to look at their ballots and process it.
As she already has, is the absentee ballots already printed out?
For the RSU?
Yes, for everything.
Not have them.
You do not have
We
them
have
yet.
state ballots.
You have the state ballots, but not as far as municipal or anything like that. You know what? You're going to have 10 days where people can have received their, because, I mean, it's not like, you know, we're sending this millions of miles away. It's right in Caribou local mail. So it's going to go pretty quick. She mails it one day, maybe 2 days the most. So I have a feeling that there's going to be enough time for the absentee ballots.
Again, the issue would be if she can send them all out at the same time, it saves everybody a stamp on 300 plus absentee ballots that
State
are going
ones
out.
until she sends them out all at once. Just hold the state ones.
How about we could have a special meeting
You could do that.
the next day for this one item,
Yep, that's an option.
and we could even meet in the morning for the vote on this.
You can bring coffee.
Pardon?
Okay.
You said Dennis can bring coffee.
Yep. Well, it's on the agenda. Chair will entertain a motion.
Make a motion. We wait until the day after the school meets with the public to discuss their budget for a special meeting at a time to be determined by the manager and council members via email. Hold a special meeting for the warrant for the RSU.
I would second that with a caveat if the motion would include making sure the numbers are in the documents for everybody to understand and read.
I'll
Be it
amend my
in
motion.
the newspaper, whatever they're going to do, this form, that it be out so people understand what their budget amount is and what they're asking for. I would second that.
So I've amended my motion. And Doug was second.
Moved by Tom, seconded by Doug, to basically table this issue until further notice. Any other questions or comments? Hearing none, all those in favor? Unanimous. Thank you very much. 7B, public hearing on Ordinance Number 1, a charter amendment modifying the budget process timeframe. Dennis.
Councilors, this ordinance was introduced earlier this year, and by the state charter revision process, we have to have a public hearing on it. The ordinance itself basically modifies the budget preparation process timeframe that we go through. Rather than having the expense budget adopted in December of a prior year, the expense budget and the revenue budget and the capital budget all be reviewed in a similar fashion in the current fiscal year that we would be in. And the council would have a little more time in which to review the budget numbers. And in summary form, it's been available to the public out in the clerk's office in the ordinance. It's in your packet form. It was noticed in the paper. We received one email today with regards to the public hearing. I believe Danielle has a copy of that, and she can read it in for the record.
Well, before we do that, we'll open it up, the public hearing, at 6:50. Anybody from the public want to speak? Dennis, you got a letter?
We do have a letter. I spoke with the individual also personally on the phone. As Danielle, she's checking to see if anybody showed up. But I'll just read it. This was from Phil McDonough, dated Monday, June 15th at 4:07 p.m. To Jane Farron, Dennis Marker, and the City Council, subject being public input for the public hearing on the charter. He says, good day, Council. There is a public hearing on tonight's agenda for changes to the charter for the budget process. Agenda item 7B. Can the Council explain how this can be conducted without an audience? How can this be debated properly in the public forum if the public is not present? And did you seek legal advice prior to scheduling this to see if it was even proper? I respectfully ask for an answer to these questions. Also, after reading what you want to do, the simplest way to attain this would be to change the fiscal year from January 1st to July 1st through June 30th. Then you would be on the same calendar as the state, school, and the county, if I'm not wrong. Thanks and have a nice day and stay healthy. Phil J. McDonough II, 8 Pioneer Avenue, Caribou, Maine.
Anybody? Nobody's waiting.
We don't have anybody waiting in the hall or received any other letters. My conversation with Mr. McDonough on the phone earlier today, it was noted that we may potentially open the meetings up in the future, and he asked if the council might consider continuing this public hearing to the next meeting. That way, if anybody does want to come and speak in person, they can come to the next meeting and express their opinions.
Wait a minute. Okay. Hearing that, I'll close the public hearing at 6:50.
Mayor?
Yeah.
If you're going to continue it, you don't want to close it.
Go ahead.
Okay, so, so if we're gonna continue it, we can't close it. If we were to continue it, does that affect the timeline at all? If we keep it open until next meeting?
I know Mayor Gondon asked me the same question. If we're trying to get this amendment onto the ballot in November, the last day that the council would need to take action on it would be July 4th. So if the hearing was continued to the next meeting, June 29th, we can continue to take public comment, entertain questions and comments at the next meeting, and then the council could debate it some more and take action that night.
Go ahead.
Can we keep it open until our special meeting about the school? And then close it?
Well, we have a meeting on June 29th. Is it the 29th? 30th? No.
June 29th.
June 29th. We could have a public hearing then, and it meets the deadline of July 4th.
Okay, yeah. I'd be okay with it.
Tommy?
Wouldn't normally say anything like this, but Phil sent me an email just recently. And I'd like to remind Phil that GC was on council for many, many years, and Phil should know the answers to those questions, considering he's been on council for many years. You can put that in the minutes.
Okay. So we're going to not close the public hearing right now, and we will, at the discretion of the mayor, continue this as an agenda item again at the June 29th meeting. Correct?
If that's the date you'd like to do that,
Where
too.
people can come in one at a time and give their public comments. Very good. To answer the question of how can you do it, when this was discussed several meetings ago, Joan brought up, how do you do it? And I remember I made the comment, that's a good question. How do you do it? And the response I think I remember hearing was, the state allows us to do this because of this virus thing, as long as we allow people to either Zoom in or write in,
Right.
email us. As long as we didn't shut those avenues off, we had a right to have a public hearing in this way. Doing the best we can with what we know.
Yes.
Okay. Any other questions or comments? We're going to continue it now, so
If you just make that a formal motion.
Chair will entertain a motion to continue the public hearing on Ordinance 1 to June 29th.
So moved.
Moved by Doug, seconded by Joan. All those in favor? Motion carries. Unanimous. Thank you. Nothing under number 8. Number 9, reports and discussion by mayor and council members. Okay, let's start with 9A. Letter to the governor regarding reopening Maine. I asked to have this placed on the agenda. I wanted to put it out there for discussion before anybody jumps to conclusions of what we're trying to do. This is the form of where we get to bring ideas to the table and discuss them in an open forum so people can hear what we're discussing about. This is why you run for city council. Bring ideas. Jane's letter of Margaret Chase Smith's speech of 1950 was so appropriate in today's environment. And what was that? 70 years ago that lady wrote that. What a great document. So it was very nice for Jane to have submitted that. And I thank her very much for it. We have to get this country back up and running. In my opinion, we have to look at our area, look at the cases we have, look at our economy, and you just put it all together. And I had an opportunity to witness last week 30 kids, 7 to 12 years old, and their parents were all there. Not all their parents. There was about 15 parents there. And they participated in a sports activity. And everybody was okay. And you know, it looked good to watch kids playing in an organized structure. And I'm thinking, I'd like to know if there's an appetite to open up our rec center. The summer program. I don't mean just the building. I mean the summer program. Is there an appetite to discuss about having our kids play softball? Having our kids go down the river in a kayak? Can we get the rec department up and running? And try to get this thing as normal as we can in the situation we're at. And I just, before we even try it, I guess you got to ask permission from the governor, top person. And if anything else, do we want to send a letter to our governor and say, boy, Aroostook County is not the same as Cumberland County in this situation. Can we have a little more jurisdiction on the reopening of our area? Restaurants got to get up and running. I know they're doing the best they can under the rules, but up here, we got to get it up and running. Hotels, motels, bowling alleys, we got to start. And the decision of whether a business should open or close should, in my opinion, and there I went off the rails there, should be between the business person and their insurance agent and the business person and their clientele. And if a clientele chooses not to go to a business because they're worried, that is up to the customer to decide that. But when I watch those kids play sports, those parents weren't concerned. Everyone's concerned, don't get me wrong when I say this, but they weighed it and they made the individual choice on their own. We have to learn how to live with this virus. We can't bring this thing to a stop. Now, I'm just one of 7. And I don't want to go down this road because this has a potential for controversy on both sides. And I would, like I do, through discussion and conversation, if the overwhelming majority of the council would like to go down this road of drafting a letter, I'm all for it. If it's a split council, and then we don't need to go down the road unless another councilor, I won't bring it up. If another councilor wants to bring it up, that's their prerogative because of the nature of it. So I wanted to just put it out there. I want to see what the feelings are. Decision doesn't have to be made tonight. But the mere fact that I'm talking this way, it should let people know that there is people out there that want to get going, want to get started. You.
Real quick, I just want to say I support your position.
Doug?
I also support it, and I think the whole thought really is 30 days late. We should have done it a month ago at minimum. I agree 100%. This is long overdue, a kick in this can. Let's get her going.
Joe?
I think there's going to be some decisions made July 1st as far as opening up stage 3, which as far as I know is going to be several more people, some more establishments and things like this. Maybe we can see what, and she usually starts early and says what she's going to do. Maybe that's something we can take a look at and see what actually she's going to do for different counties, because I think there'll be some different differences.
There will be some differences, you think?
I would think so, yeah. I do think so. 'Cause there was a news today where she relaxed some of the restrictions on the counties, Cumberland and Androscoggin and whatever the other one was. She started relaxing some of those today. So it could very well be that there may be some relaxation here in the Aroostook County area versus what's going to be there in phase 3, which is, as far as I know, July 1st. So, and I think that some of the hotels and motels have been able to open. I think that some of them have opened already, if I'm not mistaken. Because they were just open for non-essential, and I think they've opened some of them now. And she's opened up the restaurants down, for dine-in, depending on the size of them and stuff.
Tommy, did you want to?
You all know my feelings on this. I've said it many times before. I respect the governor. I respect her office. That doesn't mean I have to agree with her. If anybody thinks this thing's going to be over anytime soon, it's not, because she likes her federal funding by putting in a state of emergency. You know what? When a handful of counties in your state have really bad epidemics or pandemics, it's mostly derived from nursing homes. I don't agree with what she's doing to us up here. And quite frankly, I think she's left us behind a long time ago. So if it were me, I support sending the letter. If that's your wish, Mayor, I'll back you on that. Quite frankly, I think we should be like all these other towns, Gorham and all the other ones I've said in the past. We're just going to make a resolution to open it up. I'm so sick and tired of opening my news feed on the Bookface and seeing every single day, oh, we're going to extend this, we're going to extend this. And Joan, I hope what you're saying is true, because that would be great. I just don't see it. We need to, in my mind, we need to take the bull by the horns and just say, look, we're open. If business wants to open up, they're not gonna have any problems from us or a business owner in town. Problem is that it's like with planning board and everything else. State regulations trump our regulations. Like in Chapter 13. Dennis and I have talked about this many times. So we can do this, and we can say, look, we're really affected. Our economy's affected. Our way of life is affected. It's not like any one of us wants somebody to get COVID-19, because that could be further from the truth. What I'm saying is that we need to open this economy back up. I was one of the hardest hits because of this COVID-19 in my farm. 70-75% of our revenue stream gone because schools closed. Do I sit here and bash the schools? No, because when you have that many students in close proximity to each other with a virus that spreads like the flu, you know, I don't blame them. You want to keep people safe, but I think this country has, at least in the northeastern states, we've demonstrated that we can do social distancing. And I don't know how much more social distancing you can get in northern Maine. I mean, it's just the way it is. So I support either one. Making the letter, Mr. Mayor, or just saying, open her up.
All the governors in the United States were tasked with this unbelievable virus that back in February nobody had a clue to the results of what could happen, other than the fact that apparently, and it's a mixed bag of things, it can be transmitted fairly easy. And then now that's in dispute. I don't know. So I really thank the governor for the steps that she took, and the whole concept of flattening the curve and what the hospital did, and at great financial burden to them, was all done with the best intentions. And rightfully so, I guess. And I was very supportive of everything. I know I wash my hands a lot more now than I ever have in the past. And social distancing, there's a lot of people out there that like the fact that Mark Gaughan has to social distance with him. So that's all working out right. But now's the time to grab the bull by the horns and come to reality. And if cases break out, then we rethink things. If we start getting some hot spots in the county, back off. We have to think this through. I saw 30 kids having a ball. I saw 30 kids having a ball. And my mom's in a nursing home, and I'm telling you, it's not nice in that nursing home. Those people are lonely. It's not healthy. It's a mixed bag. So we'll leave it on the table. We have to hear from Jody, and we have to hear from Nicole.
Mr. Mayor, I do know our local representative, John DeVoe, is in support of this. I talked to him the other day.
Okay. And it would be a letter thanking her for her hard work. Can we take on some of the responsibility at the local level? That kind of generic letter. And I know there's that phrase, it's better to ask for forgiveness instead of permission, but this isn't one of those ones that you do that. Do you know how Callis did it? I read an article where Callis mayor said, we're open. Are they allowed to do that?
Again, as was mentioned, you always run the risk of the state laws trump you at the local level. And so for them to do that by resolution or by motion, however they did it, that still has potential repercussions.
Did the state step in to Calais and say you can't do that? I don't know.
Not that I'm aware of.
I don't know. So the conversation's out there. People are going to call you and give you an earful one way or the other, maybe, or maybe neutral, or how dare we try to think of opening this up, or how come you didn't do it 2 weeks sooner, and we'll get feedback and we'll see what we hear from the community. Joan?
Don't get me wrong, I don't have a problem with with the city council writing a letter. I would be in support of writing a letter. What I wouldn't be in support of is if she does not give us permission. I would not be in support of just doing it anyway.
Correct.
Opening up like Palestine, because you could be opening up the whole city to any kind of liability or whatever, and I don't think that.
I think at this point it's more of making a statement. I'm sure the people of Calais know the same thing that we know. State law trumps local. But I think it's all about saying, hey, we're here. This is what we need to do. And as local politicians, this is what we're hearing and this is what we're seeing. And people are struggling. So at that point, I think what they're doing is just, hey, we're here, we need help, and we're not getting it, and you keep hurting us.
If you're the governor, you probably have a group of people in this here saying opening up, and you have a group of people in this here saying no, keep it closed. This letter would be just a way of our small community, in some small way, being in the ear that says, hey, when you're making this decision, know that there's a small town up in northern Maine that says they'd like to have a crack at opening up. That's what the letter would be. So, to get the pendulum just to swing just a little bit with a nice diplomatic letter. So, okay, we'll put it on, we'll hear from Jody and we'll hear from Nicole at the next city council meeting. Doug?
I have a couple, are we done with that, Are we
could,
voting?
Do you want to do 9B first, or do you want to budget adjustments prior to setting the mill?
Whenever our window is to, I got some items I'd like to bring up.
Yeah. Let's go down through the agenda first, and then we'll come back to discussions by the mayor and the council. Okay. 9B, budget adjustments prior to setting the 2020 mill rate. Dennis.
Councilors, in the last meeting, you'd asked me to bring to you kind of a snapshot of what it would look like if we did a full mill decrease in the budget this year. And so I've provided this on page 29 of your packet. It provides some different scenarios of looking at the mill rate and how some of the impacts that might result from the different options. And I didn't provide an explanatory memo in this because it was going to take much longer than just explaining it to you in person during the meeting. And I'll try to do it as succinctly as possible. On this spreadsheet, what you're looking at on the left side is the very first column. It says adopted 2020 budget. The numbers that are in there are based on the expenses, or the expenses that the council adopted back in December of 2019. And so for operations, we adopted an expense budget of $9.3 million. For capital projects, the capital plan anticipated projects upwards of $900,000 being expensed or constructed, with the anticipation of $181,000 of reserves being used to offset those costs. And so for new capital in 2020, it was anticipated that we would need to raise an additional $721,000 for or towards capital projects. So our total expenses and capital for 2020, we are looking at just a little over $10 million in the budget, again, as was adopted back in December. The revenues side, we looked at those in March prior to all the executive orders and the changes that you've already been talking about tonight. Original revenues, we were looking at a little over $10 million, so that at the end of the year, we thought maybe we'd have a positive of about $23,000 back into the city's coffers. Then we received the county change and the RSU change, which we need to take into account when setting the mill rate, those being over $111,000. And we have $32,000 from our 2018 budget year that was carryover to help offset the mill rate that we can then use to, in a sense, offset the additional costs that we're seeing. Back in December of 2019, we assumed that at that point that the mill rate would stay flat. We'd have the same mill rate, and based on the assumed expenses and revenues, that would have resulted in an overlay of over $191,000. The overlay is typically used to buffer the expenses of the budget, in that if we have unanticipated expenses that come up, or we have additional abatements that we didn't anticipate, that we can use some of that overlay to offset those costs. Over the last 5 years, that overlay amount averaged $78,000. Last year, it was a little over $40,000. But for the last 5 years, we've had about a $78,000 overlay. So again, if the budget shook out the way we thought it would between December and March, then there would be no need for additional revenues, cuts. As far as the dollars go, the mill rate would have stayed the same, and we would have had, at the very bottom of the spreadsheet, we still would have had a cash reduction of $181,000. So the money that we have in the bank, we would have used some of that to offset capital cost, and that $181 would be our reduction. Now, if the $78,000 overlay didn't get spent, then that would come back and help offset that $181,000. So you can put some of that back into the bank, if you will. The next line, or the next column, in your last city council meeting, I showed you some revised revenue projections. And if we plug that into this breakdown, what you're looking at under the revenues, or the city net side, is potential deficit of $123,000 rather than a positive $23,000. And as that trickles down through the same numbers, if we were to keep the mill rate the same, you're still looking at a positive overlay, though a much smaller one, roughly $45,000. If you wanted to have a $78,000 overlay, you would anticipate needing to just account for another $33,000 of current reserves to make sure you have that overlay in place. The bottom line, as far as our cash reserve amounts go, we would have spent the $181,000 toward capital, and then you would also be reserving out or planning to spend $32,750 to, again, try to make yourself where you've been with the overlay and account for the expenses. So the third column that we have here is the full mill rate reduction scenario. If the expenses stayed the same, we had the reduction in revenues that we've talked about of the negative 146,000. By doing a full mill rate reduction, you also reduce the revenues that would be coming in from property taxes. And that the assumption is right now that our valuation stays the same. And so all of these numbers are on that assumption as well. But you'd be looking at a revenue adjustment of negative $331,000 with the mill rate reduction. With that, again, you still have the county, the school district. You assume that the mill rate is a full mill reduction, and you'll see that there's a number here that says the state minimum mill rate. As we have a spreadsheet that we plug all these numbers into that kicks out what the minimum mill rate would be according to the state, and essentially that's saying based on the numbers you've plugged in for expenses and capital and revenues and the appropriation requests from the state and the school district and anybody else that might have an appropriation for your jurisdiction, the number that you need just to come out even on everything and have a zero overlay, the state would say that your minimum mill rate should be 0.0244. And again, that's based on the assumptions that have been plugged into the equation. If you don't add any additional revenues, your overlay then would be negative $333,000. So you essentially would start upside down at the beginning of the year. And then the bottom line would be that your cash reserve reduction, in order to make up the negative $333,000, you also have the $181,000 that you plan for capital expenses, and trying to have a $78,000 overlay, you're cashing out basically $592,000 of what would be currently in the bank or in the reserves of the city. So this is just, again, we haven't made any adjustments to the expenses. We're just looking at full mill reduction with some anticipated reduction in revenues. The next scenario, the assumption is that recognizing the school district and the county are their own taxing entity, if you do a full mill rate reduction, but in a sense give them their due in the mill rate, your mill rate, instead of being a full mill, would go up a little bit from that to 0.02388. And the bottom line is still over $460,000 that the city would essentially be trying to find within its own money to make those things work. The next column starts to talk about the option of where can we cut some of the expenses in this year. This is our revised revenue and expense column. We recognize that with the executive orders and the closing of programs in some places and some of the alterations to operations because of this, there are some funds that naturally we didn't expend this year. For instance, in our recreation department, we've had 3 months of not having to pay temporary seasonal employees to run programs. And so there's potentially $12,000 to $15,000 in the recreation department that we don't need to expense this year. There's in the tax assessing department, we didn't hire a part-time employee that we thought we would. Part of that is because Penny, bless her soul, has taken on more hours, and because of her work, she's shouldered that. But the result has been that we're now almost halfway through the year. We didn't hire that part-time person. That saves us salary, Social Security costs, and a lot of other benefit costs. So in each of our departments, there have been some savings as a result of the pandemic. And so as I've looked through it, I guess a couple other things to note. In our Public Works department, we had an individual who basically retired the very first of the year, and that position's not been filled. So we also have a position in the police department that hasn't been filled, essentially from the first of the year. So as we look at operationally what's happened and some potential savings, we're looking at a reduction of almost $78,000 of expenses, operational expenses. Now, as we look at the capital projects, there are some things that we look at in the capital projects. One in particular that comes to mind is the roof project at the fire station. We have some funds set aside for that project. We also have $51,000 that were set aside for the study of a new police fire station. And those are TIF dollars, or dollars that were derived from the TIF program. And they can be used not only for the study of a new big facility, they can also be used for the maintenance or the improvement to the existing facility. And I don't think it's a far stretch to say that if we improve or shore up the structural strength of the trusses that are there and the roof, that is an improvement to the existing facility, and we can use those funds to help offset the costs. And so the $61,000 that you see there on that column would be looking at additional reserves to be expended to offset costs. So ultimately the capital expenditures, instead of needing $721,000 next year, you'd be looking at $629,000 of new capital revenue to try to generate for these projects. I know that Councilor Gahn and I talked about, we have currently a negative $60,000 balance on our River Road project. Do we have to recoup all of that $60,000 this year? In the capital plan, we did anticipate that. There might be a little bit of flexibility, and maybe we just chew off a little bit of that this year and try to come out of that hole in the future years. At the same time, we expended over $240,000 from our road reconstruction fund toward that project, which we have not put back into the road reconstruction fund toward other road projects. So those are some other things as we look at the future. Just going through the process of reducing our expenses, anticipating reduced revenues, the net potentially of the city in that case would be, again, about $47,000. So a slight increase from the original budget, even with the decrease in revenue projections. The mill rate, again, the assumption is the mill rate stayed the same. The formula kicks out an overlay over $215,000. Now, from the finance office, they like that number because that means we can start replenishing some of our reserves. You know, when we look back at expending $181,000 of reserves, a $250,000 overlay means we can put all of that back, in a sense, into the bank. But we wouldn't need any additional revenues to offset the expenses. And if the council does not want to do the full $215,000 overlay, that provides us a cushion to reduce the mill rate a little bit. In this instance, almost a quarter mill would get you down to our $78,000 typical overlay. We would still have some expense from our reserve, meaning the $181,000 plus the $61,000 of additional reserves and the TIF funds. And so we would reduce our cash by $242,000 at the end of the year, but again, possibly with the overlay being able to replenish some of that. The other options that are on the column, the next one is if we just do a full mill rate reduction, still have some expense reduction, still anticipating some revenue loss. We're looking at a cash difference of $480,000 at the end of the year. The last option would be that you do a full mill reduction, but you give the school and the county their due in the mill rate. You'd still have a reduction at the end of the year of almost $360,000 in the cash position at the bank. So the bottom line, as we're looking at that, I want to refer you back to our cash flow chart that we discussed earlier in the meeting. And if you recall, our low period is the end of July, the first part of August. In 2019, our cash position got down below $150,000. The average is, for the last 3 years, is higher than that. It floats around $700,000 as a low point on the average. But there is concern that with a full mill reduction and anticipating having to find additional funds to offset those costs, it may cause us to be at a point where we're going to have to issue a tax anticipation note, which we haven't had to issue for many, many years. The tax anticipation note that was approved by the council last year, just so that you know, was a 12-month note, and so that is still good through August if we need to utilize it, but it really depends on when we set the mill rate and make the commitment, what's going to happen with the overall cash flow of the city. So in looking at, coming back up to the third row from the bottom, the need for additional revenue or cuts, that's the line that really shows us if we want to do a full mill reduction, even with some expense reduction in that second column from the right, you would need to look at tapping into, if you didn't do any additional expenses or anticipate additional revenues, you'd be tapping into reserves $240,000. Our rainy day fund does have more than that in it right now. Is the pandemic an emergency that we could say, yes, we definitely want to tap into that to make that work? That, I guess, is a call for the council. From the administration recommendation, I think we would say if we can continue to monitor expenses, reduce expenses where we can, we'll monitor the revenues where we can. Ideally, we would keep the mill rate flat, but it appears there is some room if the council wants to adjust that down a little bit, we can do that. But I don't recommend that we do a full mill decrease this year.
Comments? Questions? Go ahead.
Real quickly, I know a lot of this hinges upon the valuation of the city being determined, and Penny's been working feverishly to get that established for this year. We did run into some issues with our TRIO program that made it so she could not generate those numbers for us. At the same time, the governor is continuing to extend the deadlines for applying for exemptions. And so Penny's really hoping by the 29th we'll have a valuation, but also recognizing that with the governor's extension of applying for credits, we may be making adjustments to that valuation into July, though they'll have probably minimal effect based on the roll-in that we might receive. So we're still just kind of waiting to see what happened with the valuation and how that also would affect these numbers.
Dennis, I always like using actual numbers when they exist.
When they exist, yeah.
And back in December 15th, when we had to do the expense budget, actual numbers did not exist at that time. You could have guessed, But we actually know actual numbers right now from 2019. It's one of the advantages of moving the date of determining our budget from December to March. So I compare with actual 2019 numbers. I take the expense of the departments, and I took the actual expense of the enterprises. I take the actual expense of the capital expenditures. Then I went down and I took the revenues, and I took the revenues from the different departments, and then I took the revenues from the enterprise accounts. And on the other column, I have what the 2020 projected budget will be when we set the mill rate. I find that if I've got the numbers right, boy, you know, there's so many numbers come at us at different angles, but I'm pretty confident I got them numbers right. You've done, the expense side isn't bad, really. I mean, there's always room for improvement. I mean, I go back and I always look at this one line, I don't know why, but street lights. And we were supposed to save $100,000. And the last full year that we used the old street lights, we spent $120,000. Well, if we save $100,000, that should mean we only need $20,000 left. And and it's been penciled in that we're going to spend $50,000. So there's $30,000 there in the expense budget.
And I would note on that particular one, that was an area we've identified as a potential cut for this year.
That's fine.
Yep.
I want to leave. I only bring that one line up, and it's a minor, really. We can always look at the expense budget. There isn't a businessman or woman out there that isn't looking at their expense budget every time they put the key in the door to walk in the morning. So you're always looking at the expense budget. Capital, we've got that plan that we're going to have someone come up and show us, put their stamp on it, and we're going to plug in the gazuntas, because we do have to keep our infrastructure going. North Main Street looks good. But now I went down to the revenue, and last year, just the departments, and I'm going to ballpark it, $9.8 million. This year, 9.7. We've subtracted $100,000 of revenue. I'm give or take. And yet we brought in $477,000 of additional revenue because of the service fees we charge our communities, surrounding communities, for our fire and ambulance department cost. We're having another $40,000 come in from revenue sharing. We started with 140, and you conservatively took out 100,000, which left a 30,000, give or take, 40,000 left over. We have a $32,000 carryover. Right there, real close to $550,000 of extra money over 2019. And you've got it reduced by 100,000. I think you're being overly conservative. Don't get me wrong. That's your job.
Right.
That's your job. I'm not. To make sure we don't get in trouble. But I think it's overly conservative to what our income is. Will be. I don't think excise tax is going to fall off the cliff. I think we're going to have the same taxes. People are going to go register their boats, register their ATVs. If anything, I think you might even see more of it done due to the social distancing thing. I'm just guessing. I'm going to take that debatable and put it over here. Dennis, I just don't know how to say it. I didn't go through that whole thing with the ambulance department. I didn't go through all that criticism. I didn't go through those unfounded comments of what they were insinuating we were trying to do. I didn't go through, and I kept quiet, never said a word. I didn't go through all of that to not give back to the Caribou taxpayer a 1 mil reduction. Some of my conservative friends want to know why it's not 1.5 million, 1.5 mil reduction, the whole $477,000. So I'm looking for a 1 mil reduction for this coming year. You?
Can I just add to that? I think it's worth debating or discussing who does that 1 mil belong to? Whose is it?
Can I answer that?
Mark.
You know, and this is going to sound kind of bad, but as duly elected people, it's ours. We're the one that took those barbs. We're the one that took the criticisms, saying we wanted to shut down the fire and ambulance department for Caribou. That wasn't true. Nobody said such a thing.
We were just doing it to pay for the school. That was another one.
Yeah. We did all this so we could help pay for the school. There was another while. I mean, it was endless. And because we went through that, it's ours to decide how to spend. And I want to spend it on the Caribou taxpayer.
Yep.
I didn't mean to interrupt
No.
your train of thought. You asked the question.
No, I mean, I meant it as a bit of a rhetorical, but it belongs to the taxpayers.
Absolutely.
And I think they deserve to get it back.
Doug?
I agree, 100%. And I just find it odd that if we were going to talk about raising revenue, it seems to fly. You know, look at times past, it just kind of blows through. Bring up the word of giving something back, and all of a sudden we have everything, including the peanut butter jar, that we've got to either put away for, or all of a sudden there's an emergency. This money is the people's. If the money isn't there, the old adage, you can't spend it. I recall, and correct me, Mark, if I'm wrong, in 6, 7, and 8, that we went a year with no overlay. The sky was there, the morning came, the sun come up. Thanks.
Joan?
I too agree that we should give something back to the people. I just am a little nervous about a full mill, because that's a lot of money looking at these figures if we should have to make it up for next year. Maybe there could be some compromise here somewhere, that we give back a quarter, maybe even as much as a half. But I think this is dangerous territory when you're getting into that $482,000 mark, that it would probably have more or worse repercussions than next year if we had to turn around and raise the taxes to take that back for some unforeseen circumstances. So I think we need to look at this. I don't think we should pull the 1 mil out of the air. I think we should look at this a little harder, perhaps cut that back a little bit so that we don't have quite as much money in the negative here that we're showing on this chart.
I agree and understand Joan's sentiments. You don't want to be caught next year. However, I don't think we're done looking at the city of Caribou objectively like we have been over the past 2 years. We're not asking for services to be cut. We're not asking for people to take, city employees to take a pay cut. Sun has rised, sun has set. We all went home, kissed our families. What we're trying to do here is to stop the verbiage of spend whatever you want when you want. It's not going to happen anymore. We can't do that to our citizens, to our business owners, to the people that are having a tough time. I think it's completely doable, the 1 mil. We have that quote-unquote rainy day fund for it. And when we establish that, I think I asked the question, can we use this to offset taxes? And the answer was yes. So I think that's quite possibly what we could use it for. So I think a 1 mil reduction is doable.
You.
And I'd agree with you that the rainy day fund is an option. And I just wanted to maybe get this $482,000 better defined, just so Joan and I understand it a little bit better. That's a theoretical number, right? We are actually $540,000 to the good on our budget. Now that can
Currently.
that can change.
Right.
So as we sit right now, we've got that number covered in our expense budget today. Right? Okay. So we could meet in a month, and or we could meet at the end of June, and we can look at those, and it might be a little bit different. But I just want to understand that a little bit better, because Joan, like you said, well, it does look risky when we're looking at theoretical numbers, but when we try to interject as much realism and actual numbers into it, it doesn't look quite so bad. That's all I wanted to say.
And recognizing that, the bottom numbers we're looking at, $400,000, $500,000, $200,000. When you look at the total budget of $10 million, those are relatively small, but it's still a good sum of money. And you're right, there's more time before we set the mill rate that we can look at, okay, how did we really weather through the majority of June? What happened with our revenue sharing May and June? Because we haven't seen some of those numbers yet. It is all going to play out. You would love to say, let's wait till we have the actual numbers to set the mill rate so we know what the actual numbers are. And you can't do that. To some degree, you have to just say, this is our budget, and are we close? And I guess that's what we're looking at, is from a conservative side, looks like this might be some things we need to take a look at as we get closer to setting the mill rate at the end of the month.
And if it was on the expense side of the equation, I'd be nervous too with those kind of numbers. But it's not. If I'm looking at my numbers correctly, we've been too conservative on the income side. Services aren't going to get cut. Nobody's getting laid off. No reduction of hours. That's on the expense side. Everything, like I said, it looks not bad. If you could just hold it, hold that expense budget, I think the income's going to come in. That's,
And we got 2 more weeks and to look at things.
and that's my crystal ball outlook. And when we get the revenue sharing numbers, and there was a lot of little stuff that was taken in the income side that I just don't think we're losing. Now, and this is where the 2019 council went not so good in the decision-making process. On the revenue side in 2019, didn't the council, through a majority vote, agree that they were going to take some one-time funds and put it in from Tri-Community Landfill?
In the 2019 budget, yes, the council.
They took 160, was it? I'm just ballparking. Give or take.
Right.
$160,000 of money that came in from Tri-Community Landfill, and we put it in the revenue. And that's why we were so adamant this year when we said, don't take any one-time money and use it in this budget. Because all that does is kick the can down the road. So there is $160,000 between 2019 and 2020 that we've got to make up for. Because it's the major reason I didn't vote for the 2019 budget, because we were using one-time funds. And it's a great lesson. It's water under the bridge. But that's 160 right there. All the other stuff, I think we're going to be right on the money. I think revenue sharing is going to come in not too bad. Because politically, how are the other towns going to do it? We basically went out and found $477,000 and said, here it is. And and we can't drop the mill rate when we find. I mean, you'll be curious to see how other communities can pull this off. And I'll bet you'll hear a lot of people saying, we dug into the rainy day fund. Thank God we got one. 2 years ago, we were asking, where's the rainy day fund? No one could find. I couldn't find it on a line item. And that $3 million that's sitting over in that bank, that's the employees' money. That isn't ours to spend as a rainy day deal. You could, but that's not the spirit of why that $3 million was put over there. It was to take the interest to help pay for the employees' retirement.
Right.
We're not going to pick away. Well, I'm not going to vote to pick away at that. We got an interest problem. I get it. But
When was that $3 million put into the bank over there?
It's about 3 years ago.
and it was wisely done to put it over there so that councils couldn't touch it. And we'd be wise to do something with it so we can't touch it. The temptation is too great. Okay, any other comments or questions? This is why we get on the city council, is to discuss things and be open. And you let yourself open for criticism and stuff. And that's the way it goes. I'm in favor of a 1 mil reduction. Our motto has been, and I want the people of Caribou to understand, this whole concept started before we even knew what this virus was. Back in January, when we were looking at these numbers and we said, well, we can do this, we can do that, and everything's going to come out rosy. We were going to have money left over That's how good things were looking. Employees got a $40,000 deal. Little check there, bonus, to be spent on local businesses. That $40,000 to local businesses, like finding a penny on the side. It didn't mean, it's meant to be, we're all in this together and we're all going to chip in. You know what a mill reduction will do for business owners now? Now we're starting to add up some pocket change. Now we're starting to help them. And when the citizens of Caribou get their full benefit of the homestead exemption, along with a mill reduction, we're going to be putting $325 in everybody's pocket, over and above what they had before. No. We're going to take that so they don't have to pay it in taxes and put it in their pocket. There's just a little bit for everybody. Okay? Now, discussions by mayor and council members. Doug?
I have 3 items. Unless I missed it in the book, did we get the information passed on to the engineer on the request from the building committee on the energy savings?
Yes, and I'll talk about that in the manager's report.
Okay.
Yep.
Thank you. I'd like to bring up, we all, as a community, suffered another loss at another intersection here in Caribou. And then the following day or two, another accident. And then I think, Dennis, you had sent out to us that the state was going to form some committee or whatever to look at the problem. I'd like to ask the council what your thoughts would be on, and maybe of doing something about the speed limit until such time the report can be completed, to show maybe a proactive role on that stretch. I don't know, is that the 3rd or 4th fatality and then the following accident a day or 2 later? Is it in our purview to set the speed, or does it have to come from the state?
It has to come from the state.
Well, maybe, if the council would entertain that, maybe a letter just asking.
And I can tell you that's one of their discussions they're already having, is to slow it down through that.
I realize, I'd just like to, not just because I knew the young lady or the family, I don't care whether I know them or not, we're losing community members. It's a tragedy, and I'd just like to see that maybe the council be proactive and saying, hey, let's send a letter off, and can we bring that speed down until this whole thing is studied and we come to a decision? Being maybe just a little proactive, I think would go a long way with the community. And I'm not saying it's going to save lives, but at least we're trying to be proactive about it. My third thing, Dennis, is the spring cleanup completed within Caribou? The Public Works spring cleanup.
Yes.
I've had a pile of dirt on my street that I cleaned up from when they windrowed my lawn and my neighbor's lawn. It was there right after the thaw. I cleaned it up. Plus I scraped the sand down that was left on the road and I put it in a neat pile. Since that time, they plowed around it once. And then they came out and we witnessed some sort of looking and discussion. And to my knowledge, they've been there twice looking at the pile. With all due respect, I don't think you can wish the pile away. I would like to see them get out there and clean it up. I spent my time and my money taking care of both my lawn, my neighbor's lawn, because we both have double lots. Some years are better than others. Last year they did a great job. This year, for whatever reason, lawns got rolled up. I cleaned it all up, put it in a pile. Would you see that that gets picked up, as I cannot go up as a counselor and direct Mr. Willett or any employee to do anything?
So the brush cleanup, it was noticed to the public that it was brush, trimmings, limbs, primarily vegetation that had been pulled out that people had cleaned off their property. So if it's a dirt pile, they probably didn't clean it up in front of you or anybody else's property. just because it was intended as a brush cleanup project.
Okay, look, I'm just asking you to deal with it before I go up and deal with it. I expect as the taxpayer side of me, take care of it. I took care of the problem that they left. I didn't say anything, I didn't raise hell, I didn't say a word. I just cleaned it up nice and neatly. I would like it cleaned up. When they went out the previous year and spun and buried the loader on a neighbor's lot down there where they turned, they were right up there and drove right past the wind road to go down and fix the neighbor's lawn, which I understand. They buried a truck on his lawn, of course. Then they drove out with the equipment, left all the mess. So I cleaned it up that year. Just have them go pick the dirt up. They're driving by to go to the landfill. Keep that in mind, right? Thank you. That's all I got.
Tom?
On Doug's note, after the first fatality at that intersection, Dennis, was there a study done by MDOT?
I don't know if a study was done. I know our police department did follow procedures in going out, marking it, determining what had happened, marking everything out, but I don't know if there was any safety study done on the intersection.
I know our police force is doing everything in their power. Problem is that we face in this town is that we have a lot of state roads that run through our town, a fair amount. And when I see nothing being done after the first fatality on that connector, and then now a second fatality of a young lady who had a bright future in front of her, I'm going to start asking questions. And I know you and I have talked about I'd like to be a part of that study that they do. And with your blessing, Mr. Mayor, you just gave me the
Thumbs up.
So I'm going to be a part of that. I'm going to ask some hard questions. But you know what? We deserve some answers. And this is... I am, you know what? I am knocking MDOT. You know what? Start taking care of us. We pay taxes in this state. Start taking care of us. Because what happened out there should not have happened. Stop putting mirrors up. We don't need to... I'm sorry, Dennis. I'm looking at you like I'm yelling at you, and I shouldn't be yelling at you. I
know where it's directed.
You know where it's directed to. And mirrors don't work. What works is actually looking at something objectively, like we do with our budget, and saying, where's the problem? How do we fix it? Because there's a problem out there. And people are getting hurt out there. They can't see past it. I'm not an engineer. I plant seeds in the ground, I make them grow, and I do it in a manner that's food safe and I can feed people. It's sometimes the simplest answer is the best one. So get something done. I know you and I talked about the stripes in the road that's in front of every toll booth downstate to get people to slow down. If you knew that was a problem, do something. Because mirrors don't work. Mirrors don't make noise. They just make people pretty, I suppose. Strips, lights, they put it in front of the roundabout. You know that's a bad intersection. And now it's taken the life of a 17-year-old girl, somebody's daughter. That is wrong. Start taking care of us. Plain and simple. MDOT, start taking care of us. We're not just people up here to be forgotten about. That's kind of how I feel. I feel forgotten about because people just do stuff in this world and they don't follow up. Do your due diligence, follow up, get out there, look at the problems. If you got to move that road further down, look, You made a mistake. You got to move it further down. Is it going to cost more money? Yeah. But you know what? You're going to save a life. And you don't put value in life. So, to reiterate what Doug said, something needs to be done. It needs to be done quick. Not a year study, not a 6-month study. Just get it done. The second thing is on my deal is I was at the planning board meeting on Tuesday, and we've talked about this before, the issue out on the Van Buren Road. If we're going to put out violations, then we need to enforce these violations. I think code enforcement officer put out 20 some odd violations, but none of them are ever enforced. Why are we wasting time going around looking for violations if we're not going to enforce them? There's no point. I have all the aspirations in the world to help people with businesses, but I have to go through the same codes that everybody else in this world has to if they want to have a business in Caribou. And it'd be the same in Presque Isle, it'd be the same in Fort Fairfield. If you have a business, you know, when I started my gun shop over on the East Presque Isle Road, I had to be ADA compliant. I didn't just keep my 32-inch door in there. I went over to S.W. Collins, I bought an ADA compliant door, and I made sure I was ADA compliant. If you put restrictions on, not restrictions, but if you put on a site plan and the review by the planning board, it needs to be followed up, and it needs to be done in the time frame that it's said it needs to be done in. This has got to stop, you know, and don't come back a year later and say, well, I didn't do something because of this. Well, no, that's not how it works, because I would have been fined for it, right? I mean, somebody would have. If businesses have to do what they need to do to be in compliance with Chapter 13. And that's just the way it is. And maybe it requires more discussion, but I'm not putting it past this council to maybe have the planning board reviewed in what was done. I walked out of that meeting and I was really frustrated on what had happened. With the mayor's blessing, I'd like to request, and the council's blessing, a complete timeline. When it started, all communications between all parties, from the time it started to where we are today. Every single communication, everything, every meeting, everything. Everything. Is that something that would be okay, Mr. Mayor?
Well, let me see. I have a philosophy that basically says, keep government out of my life.
Mm-hmm.
When you have a neighborhood situation, you got to dust off the regulations and you got to enforce them. This isn't something that we've caused. There's an issue out there. Do I wish it could go away? I do. Do I want to get involved anymore in it? I don't. But if a clear message is sent, we want this dealt with. Give it a couple more weeks, 3 or 4 or 5 more weeks, see what the planning board does. And then if we have to get involved, we'll get involved. So, you know, believe me, I'm not for regulations. But this thing has gotten to the point where if we got rules, then this is the time when you enforce them. We don't go looking for trouble. I don't want anyone going out looking for people who are violating things. of this nature. But when the proverbial stuff hits the fan, that's when you got to enforce it. And I appreciate the leniency that's been given, but at some point you got to say, this are the rules. Joan?
Dennis, does the city have the authority to fine somebody without the court's permission? I was always under the assumption that the court had to approve, that you had to go to court to get permission to fine those people.
Our code is set up right now that they basically have to be convicted of the violation.
Which means they
The
have
court
to
would be,
take-
the court would impose the minimum penalties associated with that.
So the process then would be to have to take the individual or whatever to court in order to get a judgment against it. You can't just say, as far as I understand it, you can't just say, you're gonna be fined and you're gonna pay these fines, because the easiest part would be to put the fines, and if he doesn't pay them, add it to his tax bill or something like that. But it's my understanding that you have to take it to court in order to get a judgment.
And so I think if I might, Councillor Ayer's indication is, or what he's saying is, we could have been imposing those things and taken a more heavy hand sooner in this process than what we have. Regardless of the process of getting those things imposed, it could have been expedited more quickly.
Because I asked that question, I remember probably a couple of years ago, and somebody was mentioning that the courts didn't want to hear these cases. So if you're caught between a rock and a hard place where you're going to impose the fine, but the court is going to have to be the one that's going to hear it and convict him and impose the fine on him, but then they don't want to hear these, then they, where...
They may want to hear it now. Who knows?
Yeah, maybe.
Didn't we levy a fine on a business for a sign?
Yeah, we levied. Yeah,
We-
we imposed on poor.
No, we never charged the fee. They were made aware that there could be, but it was never levied against
I
them.
understood it was a $50 fee and a $50 late, or whatever you call it, for doing the work without having the permit. Hence my words of, you should have given back their $100 and kissed their feet and thanked them for coming to Carroll, because not many businesses are doing that.
Like I said, my understanding was that they were made aware that that could happen, but it was not imposed. But, so as far as this case goes on the Van Buren Road, this wasn't in the manager report, but I can expound upon this a little bit. The planning board, when they reviewed this business a year ago, they imposed certain conditions for it to operate at that location, particularly that it comply with the DEP, with the state guidelines, completing a building permit for siting their garage, and that a fence be put up. And when the planning board set those conditions, they did not necessarily put a time frame in place to getting them done. As time has progressed and the neighbor relationships have digressed, obviously this keeps coming up, and the planning board or the individual was noticed that if he did not comply with the original conditions, that it would be brought back to the planning board and they would consider revocation of their approvals. That happened last Thursday night. It was found that the fence had been installed on the property line of concern. The siding for the building that was an original condition of approval was not installed. The applicant made the argument that, well, I may be expanding that business to accommodate a third bay on my garage so I can expand my business. I don't want to put the siding up prematurely and have to take it down and reinstall it. The planning board, their decision last Thursday night was to allow the individual to continue with his business with the findings that the fence had been, as was reported, constructed, and that he was given another 12 months to expand the garage and put the siding in as he had indicated. So at this point, they basically granted another 12-month period in which he can continue to operate. The DEP, there was indications from an adjacent property owner that he was completely out of compliance with all the DEP regulations. And as it turns out, because he's a home or an auto repair business, those regulations don't apply to him. And so he is in compliance with the DEP regulations that are applicable. So at this point, if the council wants to step in and bring this up for review, your option as a council is to appeal the planning board's decision. But the appeal does not come to you for consideration. It would go to the city's appeal board, and they would review it to say, were all things done properly and in accordance with the city's codes, and they would then make a decision.
Okay. The fence, it's not been installed. Ken, I sat right here when Ken said, well, a tree line fence is okay. Well, no, the planning board said it was a fence. Not a tree line fence, a fence. Between. I'm not thoroughly convinced that Maine Department of Environmental Protection would allow a drain to be within certain feet of a neighbor's well, considering that they just have an oil separator in the drain when two other businesses in this town were forced by DEP to cement in their drain. I'm not thoroughly convinced that they've gone out there and really done their due diligence. This guy's got a drain from an auto repair floor where oil, antifreeze, gasoline, diesel, and what other lubricants come out of a car that is going through an oil separator, which is governed by, again, like Mark says, we shouldn't be dealing with this. We should not be dealing with this. Do your due diligence. You cannot tell me that oil separator is going to separate out antifreeze, and that's not going to leak into that guy's well. Problem is it's come to us, it's at our front door, and we got to deal with it, and we shouldn't be dealing with it. That's why we pay people to deal with it. Why the taxpayers pay people to deal with it. I'd really, really, really like to see Maine Department of Environmental Protection's inspection on there. I mean, we shouldn't be dealing with this. Gosh, we got better things to do.
You.
I just want to go on the record on this subject, just to kind of dovetail on what Tom was saying. Maybe it wouldn't require a complete rebuild of the timeline, but I think what you were alluding to is what someday when this is all over, is there going to be some kind of lessons learned? Is there going to be some kind of internal reflection so we don't get to a point like Tom is saying that we're talking about this? As Mark said, these rules have long been established, and I'm like you. I'm not necessarily in favor of a rule for everything, but they're there. As you say, we didn't create them, but they're there to be enforced. If you're going to enforce them, then that's got to be carried through. And to dovetail on the other point Tom had was that payroll is 62% of our budget, roughly.
Payroll and benefits.
Budget's about 10 million. My math is right. That's about $620,000 we pay for full-time employees. Why are we talking about it? Like, why does it get to the level of 7 people that are here 2 evenings a month? There's people here that are working every day. I think it's such a poor use of our time, and there's people here every day, that's,
Well, to answer that last question, you're going to get these types of things that come to you no matter what, because you are the political body of the city, right? Citizens, they will come to you as a council and say, I've got an issue, I want you to address it. And things may still come to you even after this process.
it's part of my own kind of personal political philosophy. I'm okay with it if the bureaucracy comes to us and says, we got to change this ordinance and this is why. But to get into the weeds about oil separators and fence lines I think that's a poor use of our time, because there's people here every day. If you want to come to us and say, the planning board has put this together, take 10 minutes to debate it, we're going to change the ordinance. Okay, that's a different story. That's what in my opinion, that's what we're here for. But the particulars of the situation, fence lines, garages, siding, that's not a good use of our time.
I agree.
Doug?
On the topic of sign fine, the fine for the new business sign, that was a payment to the city, and it was hand delivered to the city. So here, one way or the other, no matter you slice the pie, over here we're handing them out, here, you get where I'm going with this. It was a payment made to the city, and it was hand delivered to the city, so I don't know where else to go with that.
Okay.
It comes across as arbitrary.
It does, and it stinks.
Okay. Thank you, Dennis. Thank you, guys. Thank you, ladies. Any other issues? Go ahead.
One more, the old Terrio building, what'd you figure out about that? If people move stuff out, what's the liability on us? This is about a month ago now.
Right. I still haven't heard back from the DOT as far as the contract and how they are treating it, how they regard it. But I'll follow up with them.
Okay.
I guess it's a planning board decision, but if one of the stipulations was put siding on your house or the garage, do it. The fact that there's expansion in the future has nothing to do with it. You agreed to put siding on that. Make up your mind. Or take the siding off and reuse it again. But it was the planning board that did that, right?
Yes.
I didn't run for city council to get involved. I know we're the political wing of this deal, but this is one of the ones that this isn't why I ran. It's why I own a half a mile that way, and I own a half a mile that way, no neighbors. It's why I pay taxes the way I pay them, and the amount I pay. Okay. Any other comments or questions? Okay. City Manager's Report number 10. Dennis.
The closing date for 60 Access Highway was originally planned for this last Friday, the 12th. The parties were working through some financial tape, and it's been moved to the 19th. And so that shouldn't move now. We've received word from the financing institution involved that they've approved the purchase, and so everything should be taken care of on the 19th. Porver's CDBG program, they've submitted their final reimbursement. Since I wrote the manager's report, they've also submitted their final documents for proof that they've complied with the CDBG program. And so we should be able to get that whole project wrapped up and done. We have received initial reimbursements from the state for our reimbursement to Porver, which is how that program works. So as far as events and marketing, there's a planned meeting on June 19th with the organizers and sponsors of the marathon, and we think we'll be making a final determination on that date as far as do we move forward, do we modify things. The registrations for the marathon are down below, I think Christina told me it was down 30 people from this time last year. So there's a lot of concern about, again, the executive orders and how all that plays into mass gatherings and limitations that might be or may not be. But trying to make sure that people have enough head time on their reservations and plans that we're not causing problems that way. The blight cleanup, we've demolished the York Street property. That's been seeded and seems to be looking pretty good. The Liberty properties are done. We're looking at 32 Fenderson now, knowing that the adjacent property owner is also interested in buying that property as soon as that's cleaned up. We have a property that was a pop-up junkyard on the access highway, and the tenant of the building was recently involved in a police action, which was tied back to robberies at the Bar and Grill and other things. So we're now reaching out to the property owner to hopefully get them to clean up that property. The Hilltop Senior Living Project, reached out to them about a ribbon cutting date. They're still in the works, and they'll let us know when that's available for a tour and a ribbon cutting. Bird's Eye cleanup. McGillen has done the final touches on the Bird's Eye site. Looks really good if you're on the property. They left a bunch of material and debris on the site last year, and we told them that needed to be reduced significantly, and they've done that. So that's really the next step with the Bird's Eye site is, again, looking at our EPA Brownfield grant application, probably having another neighborhood meeting out there, talking with the neighbors, their vision for the property, what they want to see happen there, and getting the community involved. I understand from CES, who's been involved with this project for the last several years, they have some additional ideas to reduce costs, but also enable the full cleanup of the site better, so we'll engage them again as well. Title 13 rewrite, the goal is still to have that done this year. We're still working through the administration side of things, and that's like I told the planning board, they're meeting Thursday night. At this point, we're going through definitions, so if they like reading the dictionary, that's kind of where we're at in the process, is going through legal terms and whatnot. The Sitel building, we had contact with a new legal contact or representative from their side. Need to reach out to them again. We're still waiting for some additional information from them, but we do have that on the back burner now. The power plants, Merlin 1 has reached out to the state to begin addressing the issue of insolvency of Merlin 1 and the possibility of, as they go through that process, that if they can demonstrate what they need to with the state, that will open up some of the funding opportunities to begin looking at environmental issues on the property. The DOT lands, haven't heard anything more from DOT as far as selling some of their properties for the cold storage development, ATV jumping off point, waiting on that. The riverfront, the salmon project, again, UMPI students have finished their concept design for how that would all lay out. It's a concept, one that we can incorporate, I think, into a much larger riverfront area master plan. And I think that's really what I see would be the next step is getting all these property owners in the same room and starting to brainstorm how do we really see this riverfront building out, developing, and how can we modify our ordinances to facilitate some of that and be more involved. Mr. Dana Cassidy is indicating that he's got some ideas for more filling of tenant spaces at the Caribou Shopping Center. So Christina's going to continue working with him, and hopefully we can see less vacant windows on that. Major projects. You talked about the recreation center opening back up earlier with the COVID-19. Right now, City Hall, I'll jump back. City Hall is now open. We'll keep the screens in place, the sanitation stations that are there. We're still asking that people set appointments so we know who's coming in ahead of time and be prepared, but we are open. There are social distancing indicators around the offices so that as people come in, they know, don't cross this line. I've begun just meeting people rather than in my office in the conference room to manage some of the flow that might happen up there. The Blight Toolkit narrative, spent a lot of time on that even today. We're very close. We're just still waiting for the survey data to be done. I've talked with Ken about that, and that should be all done this week as far as getting that into the GIS. And so we hope that we'll be able to wrap up that toolkit by the end of this month. I know that Paul Camping, who's on that committee, he is also very interested in getting things moving with the land bank. So we can start bringing that information to you as well. The public safety building, right now the project's on hold until July. From the staff side, we prepared some alternative designs that we can maybe bring to the council, have some discussion about. It is a smaller footprint. And the architects know that right now they're just waiting to hear back from us on how we want to look at those things. Union negotiations, we have a Public Works Union mediation date set for June 24th and 25th. That'll be at the Recreation Center starting at 9 o'clock on the 24th. We can have some discussion if you'd like, an executive session tonight about strategies on that. The procurement policy, the auditors have provided verbal feedback on the procurement policy, and they said they'll provide a supplementary written document on their comments, but their indications that the best practices for private businesses with fewer than 100 employees is to narrow the spending authority and not bury transactions in paperwork. They indicated that the city's current transaction review process is consistent with their guidelines, but we'll wait to see. They've got some information they're going to send over to us for review.
Whose guidelines?
I don't recall the citation they were using, but they're going to send all the information to us so we can look at it. The auditors, the city's auditors. The capital facility maintenance plan, Criterion Brown has inspected the buildings in the Public Works complex. They're preparing those reports and will get those back to us before they move on to the other buildings. The fire structural study, Sewell engineers, they received the question of how much will adding the insulation save us in an energy component. They estimated that based on the current fuel system that we have, that with the insulation we could save, I believe it was $3,500 a year. Without the insulation, it was about $900 a year in cost savings. So basically they say if we add the insulation to the building, we could save $2,400 a year. That being said, their cost estimate for the overall project, the last cost estimate they gave us was almost $290,000. So then one of the questions I asked them myself was, well, at what point do you say we want to save $2,400 a year, but we're going to spend almost $300,000 a year for the project? Councilor Kirkpatrick.
What's the difference in the upfront cost?
I did not ask that question, but I can.
Because you take the difference of both
Didn't the,
and divide that in, that you get your payback.
Right.
wasn't that $75,000 to replace what was there?
Just the insulation
Just
and
replacing
the roof
new
membrane.
rubber membrane, yeah.
Right. So the other question I asked them is that, because one of the things we've heard is that the additional insulation on the building is going to cause more snow buildup and thus more weight on the trusses. And so you definitely have to improve or strengthen the trusses so that we can mitigate the weight disbursement and the issues we're having with the walls. I asked in the follow-up question, even without the additional insulation, do we need to do the shoring up, strengthening of the trusses? The response was yes.
I have a hard time
that's-
swallowing that. That building's been here, when was it built, the 70s?
77.
Now all of a sudden we gotta strengthen trusses? I'm not trying to talk, negative about the farm, but I just don't swallow that, and I don't buy it at all. That is just, I don't believe that for a second. You're telling me because the building's 70 years old that somehow those bar joists have weakened and our snow load must have increased 3 or 4-fold? I don't believe that. I just tell you, we got a fly in the ointment right there. I don't believe that. I've been around buildings all my life, not that I know anything, because I certainly don't. I'm going to tell you, there's a lot of old buildings out there, buildings that have been taken down and put back up again with no upgrades. I don't buy that for a minute.
So one of the other issues we're dealing with is the insurability of the building. I'm still waiting for a response back from our insurance provider. Based on the cracking, the separation of the walls that they identified last year, just to remind the council, they reduced our insurance by $1.2 million of ability to recoup that in the event of an accident. Basically, they insured the building for, rather than looking at the reconstructability of the whole thing and the damages, they basically just said, we're just giving you the building as it is. And so with
Those wall cracks have nothing to do with structural. Sewell said that themselves. They're not a structural component. No more than them not wanting to insure this building because we got old windows in it. I don't know. It just smells bad. I'm telling you, something smells bad here. It's like we're being funneled to go to the expensive way to fix a building. And I just don't buy it. I don't. Unless there's... And I have friends too in the insurance business in the past that insured this city that I lean on to ask questions, and I will be asking that question. I just don't believe it. If it was structural, okay, now we got us a problem. But they're not structural. It's lack of maintenance for fixing them. And did anybody argue that point? Of course, we didn't know until the Sewell report. They have nothing to do with structural.
And at this point, we're still in the discussions and the questioning phase. And so we haven't made any final decision. We're not asking the council to. This is just more information. And certainly, these are the types of questions and the things that you're bringing up that Sewell would like to be able to respond to from their side as well. If the council has questions, then they're willing to provide responses to those. So that's the latest on the fire structural study. North Main Street is moving forward. As you've indicated, it so far seems to be looking good. The snow plowing RFP, that second draft was sent out over the weekend to the council for your review. So if you have comments or questions, please let me know. We can draft that up. Right now, we anticipated a mandatory pre-bid meeting the later part of July, so that anybody who's interested in any component of the snow plowing work can come in and meet with us then. I think that's the major elements that I have in the report. You'd asked about Rosignol's daycare and what we're doing with that. I've asked our staff to look at what would be the cost of not only speed bumps, but looking at maybe raised crosswalks. Essentially, they're large speed humps, 6-foot runs up to a 10-foot plateau and a 6-foot run down. Looking at 1.3 yards of asphalt material to construct it. We're just looking at costs. The cost for the speed bumps range anywhere from $500 to $600 for one set. You probably want to have 2 sets, so you have a tandem situation. People would have to slow down at 2 points in the area. So again, $1,200, $1,500 if you just went with speed bumps. The raised crosswalks, again, maybe twice that much. You're going to have the labor and the asphalt to install those. But as has been talked about tonight, we recognize there may be some things with signage and painting, but we're looking at all of those options. And there's certainly some unique painting options that are starting to be used around the country, even with, honestly, serpentine squiggly lines. Just that as people approach those, mentally it's like, what's going on here? And it causes them to slow down. So one of the trainings I had many, many years ago, the comment from the instructor was, you can do a lot of things with paint. And you can. So we'll look at some of those options as well moving forward. Are there any questions of anything else on the report that you want to discuss? Or?
Procurement policy. You and I, about 2.5, 3 months ago, had a conversation. Is it possible to do what they do at Rustic Waste Solutions, where the council gets a printout of the checks that were written? Not labor checks, but stuff, the other stuff checks.
Copy of the warrant and who the checks are made out to.
And it kind of we talked about it, but I never followed up because of the virus deal and all the stuff that's going on. Could we look at that again one more time, just to see if it's possible that you just hit a key and you can get that printed out? And it goes in with the reports that you get on our packets. On the fire station, no, excuse me, on the police station, Dennis, before I would look at voting, I first would like to see some kind of analysis done on what we charge other communities when we have to put a prisoner in our jail versus what does it take us to take a prisoner to Holton, and what are the differences? And I'd like to understand that subject a little more clear. I hate to think that Caribou taxpayers are paying more than surrounding communities. Another one of them ambulance deals. Surrounding communities should pay what we're paying. And that was it. Anybody have any other questions? You?
So I just had two, kind of dovetail on a couple of your topics. Procurement policy. Is there anything in our policy right now to prevent what I'll refer to as bulk purchases in November and December?
Like the heat fuel that was talked about earlier?
No, meaning we got a bunch of money left over, let's go buy a lot of something to burn it up. Is that the right way to say it?
Use it or lose it?
Use it or lose it. How do we prevent that?
I get what you're saying. We don't even have a policy currently, so it's something we'll have to look at. How do we really monitor that other than the current process we have? So we'll have to look at it.
And I'm not insinuating that it has gone on here. I just, you hear horror stories,
Sure.
about, like Doug said, use it or lose it. Entity will burn it up to make sure they get that amount next year.
Right.
How do we put something in place that future years, if it doesn't get spent, future councils can put that in a rainy day fund for something that's needed, not. Anyway, so the only other thing I had to say was on the daycare issue, from 6:30 to 7:30 a.m., how many police do we have on duty at that time, and how many do we have on duty at 4:30 to 6? I think this was Doug's idea last meeting. Just put somebody down there. We've got how many on duty at any given time?
4.
Okay, so we have 4. So I liked his idea. Put somebody down there.
Right. We have to reinvent the wheel for this issue, and I'm not making light of it. It's a serious issue. We have to reinvent the wheel for some deterrent down on Main Street, which is an eye shot. Maybe we don't need all these police officers. That's what we have a police force for. Granted, they can't see everything, I understand that. But this is not a big scope. It's the given point in time, twice a day, to have an officer's car sitting down there. Have him out standing on the street. Walk up and down the beat like they used to, just a presence.
If we have 4, I mean, I can't think of anything more important than that particular task at those particular times. That's all I got.
Anything else? I'd like to mention that in our reports, we also got a copy from Chief Susi on the ambulance runs from the years 1991 to 2019. This was a request made by Councillor Hugh. And I guess according to an email that we received from you, Dennis, the archives were found and dusted off to come up with some of this. Very valuable information. So a big thank you out to Chief Susi for that. And it was this is how it's done. A written report, simple. Farmer Mark could understand it, so it's pretty well got everything covered. And I'd like to see, this is the stuff that I'd like to see. I mean, it'd be nice to have a synopsis done on chip seal versus hot top in our country roads. Years versus cost and longevity, and something that's in writing. Councilors 2 or 3 years from now can go back to this document and say, well, this is where we were, this is where we're at now. And you can make analysis, you can make decisions versus verbal. Who said what? When did they say it? This is very nicely done. Very nicely done. Okay. Nothing else? Doug?
Just one quick thing. I seen in the email string, somebody had mentioned about gathering up them documents and putting them in a safe space in a protected area. Has that been done, or is it?
We have not gathered those. They've been retained in the fire station at this point. Under the retention schedule that we have, if those documents had been brought into the clerk's office, if you will, and been managed, they probably would have been thrown out a long time ago.
I think
And so-
any documents be thrown out.
No,
Because of the retention schedule that we have with public documents. Certain documents, after so many years, you toss them.
Yeah.
And so
Well,
it's,
I, for one, think that nobody should be throwing anything out in documentation from the city on stuff that a council, this council, or a future council may need to rely on. Does it have to be done and put in electronic format? If so, what's the cost? But just bailing them, I remember years back asking about previous employment records. Well, that was before the trio, and those are in boxes at Public Works, we think. You know, that's valuable information. That's telltale of exactly the heartbeat of what was going on during that time. That's to me, I don't think we should be bailing anything without careful consideration of what's being thrown.
and the information that Chief Susi has in his report, they've converted that electronically. So we do all have that now, and we'll retain that information moving forward.
okay. Item number 11, reports by staff and appointed officials.
Mayor, you mentioned Chief Susi's report. Also want to highlight that Chief Micah Hagan provided some information on the ATV enforcement program that the council had asked about. Basically, that is a grant that we're awarded every year that takes care of our equipment, training, and hours spent on the trail. It's a split grant that we utilize some of those funds, and the Warden Service uses a portion of those funds, but it is a grant that we get every year that we split between the city and the Warden Service.
I want to thank Mike for that information. My point and my comments were not to have an ATV for a rescue, of course, some way for law enforcement to get to some rescue. My heartburn is with our police officers on a trail system, and I've talked to individuals who's been stopped in neighboring communities, and I, for one, am just, I cannot agree with that. You got a job to do. It's on these streets. If they need you out there, the game wardens need them, then of course, mutual aid, of course, going out and patrolling. I'm dead set against it. You got enough work right here. If not, then, and to me, in my own opinion, it helps bolster employment numbers. We're needing more people, and we're going to hire a few here, and it gets mixed into the mix, and next thing you know, we got to hold those numbers of employment. If it came before me, I'd vote it down in a heartbeat. I'd vote to keep one for a rescue, of course, but to have our law enforcement out on trails, and I see nothing in that stated there's any law from the state that says we have to patrol those trails. We pay the game wardens through the state. Let them patrol the trails. If they need help or they need a mutual aid, well, of course, we would help them. But be out patrolling? Anyway, thanks.
Anything else?
I should get back to the recreation center because you asked about that.
Yeah.
The recreation center is now open for people that want to walk inside, or they bring their own equipment to use on the basketball courts. But we haven't opened up the weight room or the game room downstairs where there's possible communal issues. So it is open. The programs for the summer, the youth sports programs, rather than being competition oriented, are going to be skills development oriented, in that you'll still have some clinics, kids coming, learning how to hit, throw, run bases, types of things. But because again of the congregation elements of these things and the limitations we have, we'll have programs, but they will not be the same as we've historically had. We still want to make sure kids can get out, do some skill development, be outdoors, exercise. We are still doing some outdoors nature experience things as well, but on a more limited basis.
Okay, we're going to go into executive session. I want to ask a question about executive session first. Are we going to be talking about another grievance from the police department tonight?
Updates on those.
Okay. At what point do we get to tell the Caribou taxpayer about these grievances that we're getting?
I would say when it's resolved.
Because when they file a grievance, they're actually filing it against the citizens of Caribou. And the citizens of Caribou ought to know what's going on. But apparently, based on this concept that's been developed, not through this council, I'm not allowed to say what it's about yet, right?
On the safe side, no. But I understand your question. I'll look into it more for you.
Okay. Because I want the citizens of Caribou to know what's going on. Okay, we'll go into executive session. Oh, well, no. I got to Chair will entertain a motion to go into executive session. Oh, I got to read 405.6.d.
So moved. Second.
Tommy first, Hugh second. All those in favor? Unanimous. Thank you very much, everyone, for tuning in. Have a great and safe day.